Welcome back, everybody. Today, we're looking at how Taiwanese businesses are handling cybersecurity when it comes to their supply chains. You want to know what's happening with procurement and budgets, right?
Yeah, and we've got some good data on this from the 2024 CISO Insight Security Survey. And there's also some additional coverage in CIO Taiwan that we can pull from. So we'll try to condense everything down to the key takeaways for you.
Well, one of the things that I found interesting from this survey was that over 80% of Taiwanese businesses actually have standardized processes for cybersecurity, when it comes to bringing on new suppliers, which sounds pretty good. But then the catch is that only about half of them are actually strictly enforcing those procedures. It's kind of like, having a super high-tech security system and then leaving the front door wide open.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. And I think it really highlights something that the survey points out, and that is that the inherent trust that businesses place in their suppliers might be a little bit misplaced. A lot of businesses don't actually have a very good understanding of the digital assets that their suppliers have or what their cybersecurity practices are like.
Okay, so that's a little bit concerning for me as a business owner. So what does the typical process look like when, let's say, a business in Taiwan is procuring, some new ICT system?
Well, the survey outlined like 8 key stages. So it all starts with a risk assessment, of course, really understanding the potential threats. And then it moves on to evaluating security certifications. And then they actually issue questionnaires to suppliers to really understand their practices. And then, of course, there's price negotiation. But then the contract signing happens. But it doesn't stop there. There's really clear responsibility allocation. They do on-site audits. And then continuous monitoring is critical. So they don't just, check a box and move on. It's a constant process.
So they're really managing security throughout the entire life cycle of the relationship with that supplier.
Absolutely. And the survey really highlighted the importance of breaking down outsourced supply chain management into 3 stages. So pre-outsourcing, during outsourcing, and post-outsourcing.
Can you break those down a little bit more for us?
Sure. So in the pre-outsourcing phase, businesses really need to focus on risk assessments. They need to have clear checklists. They need to require proof of compliance with certain standards like ISO 27001 and SOC2, which is a report on an organization's controls that are relevant to security, availability, processing, integrity, confidentiality, or privacy. And in addition to these, they use what are called self-assessment questionnaires, or SAQs, to really delve into the security posture of their potential suppliers. So it's kind of like making sure everyone's on the same page right from the get-go.
It's like a comprehensive security interview before you even start working together.
Exactly. Then during the outsourcing stage, it's all about really robust contract management. So that involves airtight SLAs or service level agreements, periodic on-site audits. Sometimes they'll even bring in a third party to do those. And then, of course, continuous monitoring is vital. So suppliers will provide regular security reports, and businesses might use third-party tools to monitor external security status as well.
So there's that element of trust but verify throughout the entire process. It's not just about good intentions. It's about making sure that those intentions translate into, real-world security practices. What about after the relationship's over?
So the post-outsourcing phase is equally critical. Businesses need to make sure the service transitions smoothly and that any sensitive information is handled properly. So it needs to be handed over securely or destroyed or deleted, nothing left to chance. And it's not a one-size-fits-all approach either. They classify suppliers based on their procurement value and how much personal data they handle to properly prioritize audits and resources.
So they're closing the loop on security even after that supplier relationship ends.
Yes, exactly. And speaking of closing loops, we have to talk about contracts. They're absolutely critical, especially when you're dealing with ICT systems.
Yeah, contracts, sometimes feel like just a bunch of legal jargon. So how are Taiwanese businesses using them to really bolster their security?
Well, it's about moving beyond that mindset that it's just paperwork. In Taiwan, they're really emphasizing that contracts are a powerful tool for ensuring security. So they need to clearly define what the supplier is responsible for, like what happens if there's a security incident, who reports it, how is it handled. What about dealing with product defects? What's that process? Even something like audit rights needs to be spelled out.
So it's about proactively addressing those potential problems and having a plan in place if something does go wrong.
Exactly. It's all about limiting risk and having recourse if the supplier drops the ball on security.
All right, so we've covered the processes, the stages of outsourcing, and the emphasis on contracts. But all of this has to have some kind of impact on budget, right?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The survey found that, unsurprisingly, the financial industry leads the way in cybersecurity spending, followed by the high-tech manufacturing sector. Most budgets that we see are somewhere between 10.01 million and 50 million new Taiwan dollars. So, it's a significant investment.
So how are they actually spending that money?
Well, they're focusing on 2 main areas: system upgrades, and specific projects. So, for example, they're bolstering computer security safeguards, they're running attack and defense drills to test their systems and train their people, and they're implementing international recognized standards like ISO 27701 for privacy information management and ISO 202301 for business continuity management. So they're really taking a multi-layered approach to security.
And that makes sense given how interconnected everything is these days. But the survey also mentions, some hurdles that businesses are facing. So what are some of the biggest challenges for them?
Well, the top two challenges are pretty telling. 25% of businesses struggle with the complexity of choosing and implementing the right cybersecurity technologies and tools, and then 21% are concerned about budget limitations. So it seems like there's this recognition that you need the best tools to stay secure, but those tools come at a cost, and getting the budget approved can be tough.
Yeah, that's a classic dilemma. So where are they focusing their investments? What are some specific recommendations that came out of this survey?
Well, the survey highlights a few key areas. It all starts with the foundation, which is network security infrastructure. So we're talking about firewalls, intrusion detection systems, and endpoint protection to secure all those devices connecting to the network. They're also really focusing on data and privacy protection, so investing in data encryption, data leak prevention systems, and strong identity and access management, so only authorized personnel can access sensitive information.
So it's about securing both the infrastructure and the data that flows through it. What about the human factor? Are they addressing that as well?
Absolutely. The survey highlights that employee training is critical. You can have the best tech in the world, but if your employees are clicking on phishing links or falling for scams, it's all for nothing.
Right. People can sometimes be the weakest link in the chain. What about more advanced technologies? Are Taiwanese businesses exploring those avenues as well?
They are. The survey mentions growing interest in technologies like zero-trust architectures. So that's where you're constantly verifying every user and device, trying to access your systems no matter where they're coming from. And they're also looking at AI-driven security analytics. So using machine learning to detect and respond to threats in real time. That's a big leap forward in terms of proactive threat detection.
So it's a mix of strengthening the foundation and exploring some new frontiers in security technology.
Exactly. And they're also investing in post-incident response. So tracking what happened after an attack and how they can improve their defenses. It's about learning from those experiences and becoming even more resilient. And of course, they're investing heavily in cloud security solutions. So much data and so many applications live in the cloud now, so securing that environment is paramount.
So it sounds like Taiwanese businesses are really taking a comprehensive approach covering all the bases. But there's another layer to this story that we can't ignore, and that's the geopolitical context. Taiwan's unique position in the world definitely has an impact on its approach to supply chain security, right?
Absolutely. And the survey addresses this directly. Businesses are very aware of the risks, and they're carefully evaluating whether to include products or supply chains from mainland China in their procurement processes. They're weighing the potential benefits against the geopolitical risks. So it's a complex calculation.
So they're not making decisions in a vacuum. They're factoring in that larger geopolitical landscape, which adds another layer of complexity to this whole issue.
Yes, and the survey highlights that Taiwanese businesses are looking beyond simple cost considerations, and they're taking a risk-based approach to procurement, particularly when it comes to sourcing from mainland China.
It's a strategic decision, not just a financial one.
Exactly. The survey even quotes Chen Jicheng. He's the Chief Information Security Officer of Taishin Bank, and he advises businesses to really analyze the suitability of including mainland China-made ICT products or supply chains in their procurement processes based on a risk-based approach. So it's a reminder that cybersecurity decisions are rarely straightforward.
Right. It's about navigating this complex web of factors: cost, security, geopolitics. That's a lot to consider. And speaking of interesting factors, the survey also dives into some case studies and industry trends. And it's fascinating to see how different industries are approaching this challenge.
Yeah. They compare the leading roles of the financial and high-tech manufacturing industries, which are both highly regulated and risk-averse. And this is reflected in their very proactive approach to supply chain security, both in terms of audits and budget allocation. So they're definitely setting the bar high.
And that makes sense given the sensitive nature of the data they handle.
What's really interesting is the emergence of this thing called supplier tiering. So businesses are actually classifying their suppliers based on their importance and the level of risk that they present. This allows them to adjust the depth and frequency of their audits, which is a really smart way to optimize resources and focus their efforts where they matter most.
So instead of treating all suppliers equally, they're prioritizing their efforts based on that level of risk.
Exactly. And the survey shares a great real-world example. A display panel manufacturer is linking its ESG ratings, so environmental, social, and governance ratings, with their supplier quarterly business review scores. So it's not just about security, it's about encouraging suppliers to be responsible corporate citizens overall.
So it's a more holistic approach to supplier management where security is one piece of a larger puzzle.
Exactly. And by incentivizing suppliers to continually improve their security practices, they're essentially building a more resilient and trustworthy supply chain.
So what we've seen so far is that Taiwanese businesses are not taking supply chain security lightly. They're approaching it strategically with a focus on those robust procurement processes, smart budget allocation, and continuous monitoring throughout that supplier lifecycle.
Yeah, you've captured it perfectly. They're not just reacting to threats, they're proactively building a more secure and resilient ecosystem.
It's great to see such a proactive approach to supply chain security, especially in such a dynamic and interconnected world. But there's another side to this story that we haven't explored yet, and that's the psychological aspect. How does trust, or perhaps mistrust, play into all of this? We'll dig into that in the next part of our deep dive. So we've been digging into, the nuts and bolts of how Taiwanese businesses are tackling supply chain cybersecurity. But I think it's time we shift gears a little bit and talk about something we often overlook, and that's the human element. It's one thing to have all these processes and technologies in place, but at the end of the day, people are making the decisions.
Yeah, that's a really important point. We tend to focus on the technical aspects of cybersecurity, but the human factor is just as critical, if not more so. When you choose a supplier, there's a certain level of trust involved. You're essentially betting that they will protect your data and your business interests.
Right, you're counting on them to be competent and responsible. But as this survey highlights that trust can be misplaced, blind faith in your suppliers can be a recipe for disaster, especially in today's interconnected world where a single vulnerability can have this ripple effect across, an entire network of businesses.
Absolutely. It's like a domino effect. One compromised supplier can topple a whole ecosystem. And that's why it's crucial for businesses to move from blind trust to informed trust.
So how do we go about cultivating that informed trust? What can businesses do to ensure that they're not just blindly trusting their suppliers?
Well, it starts with due diligence. Before you even sign a contract, you really need to thoroughly vet your potential suppliers. Don't be afraid to ask tough questions. Request evidence of their security certifications. Dig into their incident response plans. And really grill them on their data protection policies. It's your business on the line.
It's like interviewing a potential babysitter, right? You wouldn't just hand over your kids to someone without, checking their references and making sure they knew how to handle an emergency.
Exactly. And just like with a babysitter, communication is key. Don't just check in with your suppliers once a year. Make regular communication about security updates, recent incidents, and emerging threats a standard practice. Transparency and open dialogue build stronger, more trusting relationships.
The survey also mentioned the use of incentives, like that display panel manufacturer that ties its ESG ratings to supplier performance reviews. That seems like a smart way to reward suppliers who are going above and beyond on security.
Absolutely. Incentives are a powerful motivator, and they send a clear message that security is a top priority for your business.
So it seems like Taiwanese businesses are really focused on building that culture of informed trust, both internally and within their supplier networks. They're not just throwing technology at the problem, they're addressing the human element as well.
And I think that's what sets them apart. They're recognizing that cybersecurity is not just an IT issue, it's a business issue. That requires a holistic approach, and that includes understanding and managing the human factors involved.
So what's the takeaway for our listener? What can they do to apply these insights to their own work?
I would say it's about adopting that mindset of informed trust, asking the right questions, and pushing your suppliers to prioritize security. It's also about recognizing that security is everyone's responsibility, not just the IT departments. Every team from procurement to legal to operations plays a role in building a resilient supply chain.
And if you're looking to dive deeper, we've included links to all the source material in the show notes. Knowledge is power. And the more you understand about the evolving threat landscape, the better equipped you'll be to protect your own organization.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Now, we've talked a lot about the steps businesses are taking, but let's zoom in on something specific that often gets overlooked, and that's the emotional side of cybersecurity. Specifically, how fear and complacency can influence decision-making.
Oh, that's a fascinating aspect. We often think of cybersecurity in terms of technology and processes, but emotions play a huge role. Fear, for example, can be a powerful motivator, but it can also lead to hasty decisions and overspending on security measures that might not be necessary.
It's like buying the most expensive home security system after watching a scary movie. You might feel safer in the moment, but it might not be the most rational or effective use of your resources.
Exactly. And on the flip side, complacency can be just as dangerous. It's that it won't happen to me attitude. That can lull businesses into a false sense of security. leading them to skimp on essential security measures, neglect system updates, or downplay emerging threats.
It's almost like leaving your front door unlocked because you live in a safe neighborhood. You might get away with it for a while, but eventually that complacency can catch up with you.
And then, of course, there's the emotional roller coaster that often follows a security breach, the initial shock and disbelief, followed by anger, fear, and a scramble to contain the damage.
And the inevitable blame game.
It's natural for emotions to run high in those situations. But it's crucial for businesses to have a clear-headed and well-rehearsed incident response plan in place. This plan should outline the steps to take in the event of a breach communication protocols and how to conduct a thorough post-mortem to learn from the experience.
So how can businesses strike that balance between fear and complacency? How do they approach cybersecurity with a level head?
It's about staying informed about the threat landscape without getting swept up in the hype or fear-mongering. It's about taking a data-driven approach to risk assessment, understanding your organization's unique vulnerabilities, and prioritizing your security investments accordingly.
So being strategic and level-headed, not reactive and emotional.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that cybersecurity is not a destination, it's a journey. There's no magic bullet, no single solution that will guarantee 100% protection. It's about constantly learning from mistakes and adapting your security posture as the threat landscape evolves.
And it's about embracing that multi-layered approach, combining technology processes and people to create a truly resilient defense.
Well said. Now, as we head into the final part of our deep dive, let's shift our focus to something more concrete. Let's explore some practical steps that our listener can take to strengthen their organization's supply chain security.
This is where the rubber meets the road. We've covered a lot of ground, from procurement processes to the psychology of security, but now it's time to translate those insights into actionable strategies. So let's dive in. Okay, so let's get down to brass tacks here. If our listener wants to walk away from this deep dive and immediately start improving their organization's supply chain security, what's the first step?
Well, the foundation of a strong supply chain security posture is a robust supplier risk management program. And it all starts with clearly defining your organization's risk tolerance. What level of risk are you willing to accept? And then you need to identify your critical suppliers, the ones that, if compromised, could significantly disrupt your operations. And finally, implement a comprehensive assessment process to evaluate their security practices.
So it's about being strategic and understanding, where your biggest vulnerabilities lie. It's not just about treating all suppliers equally.
Exactly. And it's not enough to rely on, generic questionnaires or checklists. You really need to go deeper. Request evidence of their security certifications, interview their security personnel, and seriously consider on-site audits for those high-risk suppliers.
It sounds like you're advocating for a trust but verify approach. It's not about being suspicious of your suppliers. It's about making informed decisions based on, real evidence.
Precisely. And remember, this isn't a one-time exercise. The threat landscape is constantly changing. Supplier risk management requires continuous monitoring and reassessment. You need to stay vigilant and adapt your approach as new threats emerge.
It's like tending a garden, right? You can't just plant the seeds and walk away expecting everything to thrive. You need to water, weed, and fertilize regularly to keep those plants, healthy and resilient. What about contracts? What role do they play in all of this?
Well, contracts are more than just legal formalities. They're a critical tool for setting clear expectations and establishing accountability when it comes to security. Use your contracts to spell out the supplier's responsibilities for data protection, incident response, and security testing.
And don't be afraid to negotiate those terms. If a supplier's security practices don't meet your standards, push back and demand improvements.
Absolutely. You have leverage, especially if you're a significant customer. Make sure your contracts include provisions for ongoing monitoring and auditing. You need to be able to verify that your suppliers are living up to their security commitments and keeping pace with the evolving threat landscape.
So we've talked about risk management and contracts. What about the technology side of things? What tools or solutions should businesses be investing in to enhance their supply chain security?
Well, the cybersecurity technology market is overflowing with options. But it's important to start with the fundamentals. Implement strong authentication mechanisms like multi-factor authentication to protect access to your systems and data. Encrypt sensitive data, both in transit and at rest, to prevent unauthorized access.
And make sure your systems are patched and up to date to mitigate known vulnerabilities. It's cybersecurity hygiene 101, but you'd be surprised how many organizations neglect these basic steps.
You're absolutely right. And then, as you mature your security program, you might consider exploring more advanced technologies, like security information and event management systems, or CM systems, to centralize your security logs and give you a more comprehensive view of your security posture. Threat intelligence platforms can also be incredibly valuable for staying ahead of emerging threats.
And of course, we can't forget about the cloud. So much of our data and applications now reside in the cloud, so securing that environment is paramount.
Yeah, cloud security is a shared responsibility. Make sure you understand what security controls your cloud provider has in place and what you're responsible for managing. Choose providers with a strong security track record and implement appropriate security measures for your cloud workloads.
So it's about having a layered approach to cloud security, just like with your on-premise infrastructure.
Exactly. But remember, technology is just one piece of the puzzle. You can't just buy a bunch of fancy tools and expect to be secure. Security is a holistic endeavor.
It requires that multi-layered approach that combines technology processes and, most importantly, people.
You got it. We've already talked about security awareness training, but it's also important to foster a culture of security within your organization. Create an environment where employees feel comfortable reporting suspicious activity, whether it's a phishing email, a security breach, or anything else that seems out of place.
And make sure those reports are taken seriously and investigated thoroughly. It's about encouraging that vigilance and proactivity.
Absolutely. Don't punish honest mistakes. If an employee accidentally clicks on a phishing link, use it as a learning opportunity to reinforce security best practices.
It's about building that culture of trust and transparency, where security is everyone's responsibility.
Exactly. Remember, a secure supply chain relies on everyone being aware and engaged. By empowering your employees to be your first line of defense, you can significantly enhance your organization's resilience to supply chain attacks.
So to wrap up this deep dive into the world of supply chain cybersecurity, what are the key takeaways for our listener?
Well, the threats to supply chains are real, and they're constantly evolving. But here's the good news. By taking a proactive and comprehensive approach to security, you can build a more resilient organization, implement robust risk management practices, leverage technology effectively, and empower your employees to be vigilant.
It's about being prepared, not paranoid. Understand the risks, make informed decisions, and continuously adapt your security posture to that ever-changing threat landscape.
Well said. And remember, the journey to a more secure supply chain starts with a single step. Take what you've learned from this deep dive, apply it to your own organization, and start building a more resilient future.
And that's a wrap on another deep dive. Thanks for joining us. And until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay secure.